Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. This is the Filmmakers Life. We meet every other week and just sit down to chat with a filmmaker. And every other week, we talk to a filmmaker and find out how they have built their career. And now that we've been doing these interviews for a couple of years, I'm very clear about one thing, which is that every single filmmaker has their own individual path. No two paths are the same. It's very interesting. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Joanne Butcher. I am a business coach and I help filmmakers raise money. I help them learn how to raise money and raise money. And so it's a very sort of specific piece that I do. I work with filmmakers from those making their first short to filmmakers raising millions of dollars and everything in between. So I would like to introduce to you today, Catherine Herrera. And I don't do any reading of the bio. We wrote all of that, but we're going to find out all about you.
Open book.
We are going to find out everything. So the way we do it, but my first question always is, when did you first know you were a filmmaker?
Well, I think it came pretty early on for me. It started with being introduced to art through, my father would take us to museum exhibits all the time. And so I think that was an opening for me. And then my grandfather and my father were photographers as well. So that interested me in photography, and I took my first pinhole camera class and fell in love with photography. And I actually didn't have a camera for a few years. And so I don't know if you guys remember, how we used to do that, right? And so I was taught, well, you could do that and train your eye, So I figured, okay, without the camera, I can still do something to, to grow as a photographer. And so I think when I knew I wanted to be a filmmaker was when I was at USC in college. And
So then I'm going to go back a little bit.
Okay.
So how old were you when you took that pinhole camera class?
I was in 5th grade.
How old is that? I'm English. I can never figure out how old the grades.
Like around 12.
Oh, okay, great. And then you said your father and your grandfather were photographers. What kind of photographers were they?
Well, for my grandfather, it wasn't really a profession for him. He was an electrician. But he documented much of his life, and recently I received an archive of photos from my grandfather and my father, and so his photos go back to the late 1920s.
Wow.
And my father, I have probably about 40 or 50 years of his photography as well. So I just recently got a grant that's going to be announced next week, but it will make possible having someone work with me on that archive. So someone's encouraged me to have a 4-generation exhibit with those two and myself and my son.
Oh, your son's a photographer as well. No, I think that's very interesting. My godfather was a photographer, and he would show up on my birthday and on my sister's birthday, like clockwork. And I knew that I was going to have my photograph taken by my godfather. And I feel as though he was the relative I was closest to, and that made a huge impact on me.
Absolutely. We kind of forget in this day and age the impact that photos, played in a family's life. And in my grandparents' kitchen, they had a bulletin board. And it was, kind of like our Facebook in the day, because everyone was kind of scattered around. And so everyone sent photos, and my grandparents put it up there. And so it was a way for us to keep in touch. And I think that really influenced me as a filmmaker and as a photographer, the really very intimate and personal uses of the mediums.
And it's so exciting to hear that you just received those archives. I don't know if you know the work of Thomas Allen Harris. He's one of my clients, but you have to look him up. Thomas Allen Harris, and he all his work is based in his family archive. All his films are based in the family archive, and he teaches that work at Yale, and that kind of thing. But it's really, working with him for several years, it's really opened up my eyes to the way that we all relate to ourselves through images. So for me, I am very aware that having my godfather take those photographs of me every year created some version of myself that I otherwise would not have had. And so, it's interesting to hear your grandfather was an electrician, and yet he documented his entire life. That's really fantastic.
Yeah, and my father broke through. He had published work, exhibits, and that kind of thing. He even made films, but he trained first as a doctor, psychiatrist, and then he got into food security and that kind of work later in his life. But I think that definitely influenced me, in terms of the time it took me to get to the place where I thought I could be a filmmaker. Because, I think that's how I ended up studying the law first. I graduated with a law degree because, all my photography and art was always on the side.
Right.
It was almost at one point in my life, I said, this is kind of becoming a double life, where I'm even nervous to share that I'm doing this because, we weren't supposed to do that. We didn't have those opportunities, and those weren't available to us. So to be here at this point in my life and see the programs that are running, and to see all the amazing young filmmakers with the stories they have, is just very inspiring. For me, I just find that beautiful.
Were your father or grandfather, were they immigrants to America?
No,
No, they were born here.
Yeah, my great-great-grandfather was born in San Francisco in 1857. But having Native ancestry, much like African American ancestry, can be difficult to find all the documentations and sort of sort through the protective myths that were sort of surrounding people, and the ways that people survived. And so that presented a big part of my work over the last 20 years.
And the only reason I asked that was because I feel as though there's my father was an immigrant to England, and again, there's sort of another layer of being able to tell your own story. But in your case, it's more the native piece, the Native American piece, that's the sort of missing part, right?
Yeah, I really, kind of later in life, my mom sort of, was asking, why are you always focused on your dad's family, And I said, well, you've never shared with me your genealogy. And so she sent it to me as a Christmas present one year. And it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And I share both sides of the picture. My mom's ancestors are immigrants, except for one. And so I carry both sides of those stories. And when I did my mom's genealogy, it was shocking to me that I could find so many people in a 24-hour span. And I had spent 20 years trying to gain all the documentation for my family. And yeah, so I think, I intimately understand those, having both of those histories and the responsibility that brings.
And what are both? Because I know, but
the
people.
My mom is European American, and my dad also has European Italian.
Yes. So I'm always, and whenever with the guests, they're always telling the story. Then I'm like, can we go back to the?
Yeah. Oh, I'm throwing out a bunch of stuff too.
Yeah. So you got, so, oh, I know what the thing was about the immigrant. I was thinking that often immigrant families are so keen for their children to take on a profession like the law or something like that. And so you were talking about living a double life, and it reminded me of me years ago, because I used to have a fundraising resume and a filmmaking resume.
I love
now,
that.
now I'm just one person.
Yeah, it feels good, right? Yeah. I think
And I
that's
don't have to hide one side because the other side, all of that. And I thought that was so funny when you say I became a lawyer and I was just, my art was just on the side.
Yeah, it was really quite a process to go through. And I think one of the surprises as a filmmaker, as an artist, is that you want to communicate, you want to share with an audience, and sometimes you can find this contradictory part of you that is scared to and so you think, wow, what a contradiction that can exist within an artist, those push and pull. And I think that's pretty normal. But yeah, it's it really took me a long time to get over that and not disappoint my family. And I graduated from law school. I clerked for a federal judge, and while I was clerking for the judge, I was making my first documentary, again with the borrowed camera because I didn't own one. And when I would come out of the courthouse, I would see every afternoon, mainly women were out there, and they were signing to their loved ones in the county jail with the glass windows. And so they were able to communicate with each other, a practice that's been ended. But I got to know several of the women, and one woman in particular shared with me her story, and that was my first film, Alphabet People. And a dear friend offered to edit it. And it got picked up and really sort of started my career. And one of the things that came out of that was the responsibility I had to the Latino community. And I had some elders sort of pull me aside, and their conversation with me really got me to thinking. And I think their advice came up later in my career, when I was sort of tired of being part of a media system that was sort of sharing the same stories over and over again, culturally. And so I think their words were very important, and that film was important to me as a filmmaker. I was also able to raise money for schooling, because that was what Sandra wanted, the lead person in the film. And we did community screenings. And so that was just a really positive education for me as a filmmaker, and how to engage in a responsible way.
That's fantastic. I've never heard anybody talk about that signing thing. I saw the movie, I think it's from the Dominican Republic, called Carpinteros. Did you ever see that?
I haven't seen that, no.
Oh, wow. You're going to have to see this film, because it's all about that. It's the women are outside. Well, no, actually, it's a women's prison and a men's prison next door to each other, with a fence in between.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have created this signing language that they use to communicate. And the film is so amazing, and it looks like a documentary, but it's a fiction film. But the whole time I was watching the film, I'm like, wait, did the filmmaker make this up? Does this exist? Do people, is there actually a place where people sign? And now you're just describing it. So there must be a tradition of that, a history of that.
I think so. And a really an example of resilience, right?
Yes.
In many ways. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. So when you made that film, you were now practicing in the law. and then you made your first film. Did you then go to film school after that, or did you ever go to film school or not?
Well, while I was at USC studying the law,
The
I was
law.
taking film courses on the side, film and
Yes,
art and
yes.
photography courses on the side.
I came to
Um,
America and I went to the University of Miami, and I was doing a master's degree in English literature, and I was taking film courses. And I remember my colleagues saying, I don't know why that Joanne is taking those film classes.
right, the pressures, I mean, there's a whole list, oh, how selfish of you, who do you think you are, we never get a right to do that, I mean, I know the whole list.
Yes, yes, yes. It's so strange that there is all that pressure. It's like, stay in your lane or something, and I had no idea at the time that I was taking those courses that film would ultimately be what I do. But it's still odd that people have that approach of kind of like, why are you doing that? That's a waste of time. That's the voice that I hear in my head. Well, that's a waste of time.
Yeah, I think that's pretty natural. I'd like to share with filmmakers that if you're feeling that way, it's okay. That there is, as someone explained to me, there's a system that isn't designed to receive our stories in some cases, and that's why I think some of the change that we've seen in the last few years is encouraging. And I really hope it expands, because I just see so many great filmmakers coming up, and you need that opportunity to try out a film, to try your ideas. And with the technology now, we just have so many ways to do that in a more affordable way.
Mm-hmm. Yes. With your first film, you were saying that you did community screenings and you were able to raise some money. Did you mean that you raised money for your education or for your subjects?
For Sandra, the main participant. Yeah.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
really, really fantastic. I don't think I've ever heard a filmmaker say that before. So
Well,
what were you
yeah.
able to help her do?
Well, she wanted to go back to school, and she, shared some difficult parts of her life, and a lot of it wasn't on camera, and so, I really credit the elders who sort of took the time to talk to me about that and really educate me about my responsibility. It's not that I didn't know it. I mean, that was my impulse already, to share stories of my community, of my family, but they really had me think more about that. And so I credit them for that. And that was my response. And I think now there's a lot more of that kind of work with people, but and rethinking of ethics and what we're doing in filmmaking. So I'm really grateful for that.
Even the fact that I use the word subject, the subject of your film, I actually don't usually use that term anymore. And you use the word participant. And I think my favorite contemporary word is contributor.
That's a great word. Yeah. Yeah.
I really like that. I really like that, because then we are crediting the person who's being documented and whose story is told with the fact that they are telling their story. So I really like that. But yes, subject is really a thing of the past, even though I just said that. But I'm interested in, so you were saying that you did the community screenings. Where did you go? What kind of organizations did you show the film to? What was that like?
Well, I was already part of the Latino community in El Paso, which is where I was at the time. And I had people lend me the camera, the editor in Los Angeles who came on board with the project. So it was mainly the community that I was a part of, and the local community where the jail was and the families lived.
Mhm.
And it was curious, but I was contacted from the San Francisco Film Festival to show it there. And I had received a grant to go to Mexico. And so the film, I think, could have probably gone further, but once I crossed into Mexico, you know, it was even before internet. Believe it or not, I remember when email started in Mexico, and it opened up the whole world to me to keep in touch with friends and family and colleagues and that sort of thing. So eventually the film was placed in the Chicano Film Library at the University of Wisconsin. And that was thanks to a fellow filmmaker who really loved the film, promoted it, and was so encouraging for my career.
Fantastic. And you got a grant as well to go to Mexico. So was that also to work on your films?
Well, that was still the law stuff. So,
Law. Oh my gosh.
yep, I was still doing the law. And so it was with to study the copyright law in relationship to NAFTA and how that was going to impact things. But I eventually started working in Mexico as a photojournalist. I had done that work before. And so it was an amazing opportunity. And that sort of rolled into doing news producing. And eventually, frankly, it got to a point where, you know, I was sort of told, like, be a lawyer or let it go. And I had a very, you know, profound experience with one of the attorneys I worked with that I think just made it more clear for me, and it was time for me to jump into it. And so that's what I did.
And that was it, the end. Wow. Yeah. This is all very resonant for me, because I remember the day that I gave up my last professional fundraising work, and I was on the board of the Association of Fundraising Professionals in San Francisco, and I finally stepped down. This was during I was too sick to work for 7 years, and that was the last thing I was holding on to, the last piece where I was like a professional instead of just a sick person. And when I let that go, I was just devastated, not realizing that I was free.
Yeah, it was a really sort of profound moment. I also started turning the camera on myself. I gave myself that exercise because I think as a Native person and a person of color, I was questioning my role in media. And I was asking people to share their stories with me, and I realized I should really figure out what that means, what that feels like. And so that sort of began a new exploration in my work. But I continue to make documentaries. So I made my first feature documentary, which was called Transition. And it was about the election of Vicente Fox, the first opposition president in Mexico in more than 80 years. And I also started exploring my relationship to my experience growing up in California, the racism I had experienced, and I think started to confront the racism I faced in my own family. And I just started digging more. And I think that's, you know, when I started questioning my family a little bit more, like, you know, where are our relatives in Mexico? Where do we come from? And, you know, they didn't have answers. And that seemed very strange to me. And that sort of began the deeper conversation of exploring. I knew we were Native, but what did that mean? And who did that mean? And so I think that was a big turning point in my life. And I wanted to come home and find out, because, you know, we have a saying, if you don't know who you are, you don't know where you're going. And I think that's very true. I think that I was very much in my work probably as well, but trying to work through that, trying to sort through all of those things. And I really understand when we talk about the post-colonial trauma and the experiences that we have growing up and living in the United States and many other countries of, being outside the dominant group. And so I think a lot of these conversations that come up in the last few years are very valuable and important as filmmakers, because you're dealing often with tough subjects, and as the director, producer, you're absorbing all of that in. And I think there's more conversation too about helping filmmakers work through that trauma.
Yeah, definitely. And as storytellers, I think you made an incredible point, which is that if we're telling other people's stories, then, how have we really, we have to explore, what that means to be a storyteller and where our perspective is coming from. And I think that things have opened up so much in the last few years. I mean, there's an incredible backlash, obviously, happening, but it's so exciting to me to hear stories that we just didn't get before.
Yes.
It's like you talked about transitions, and then you went into this very, very big topic, which I could talk about all day, but I want to go back to transitions because I have some things I wanted to ask you about that film. It's basically a day, right? A day in the life of the election. And at the beginning of the day, we don't know who's going to be elected, right? And at the end of the day, we do know that Vicente Fox was elected, and Vicente Fox was a new person on the scene after 30 years of the same party, right?
Actually, 80 years.
80.
Yeah,
My God,
long time.
80 years. So yeah, it's a wonderful film. And I wanted to ask you about your aesthetic, because it feels to me so understated, so low key, so, oh, we're just here chatting. It just has that feel, oh, just chatting to some people, but there's a very, very clear structure and, things are happening. But anyway, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about your aesthetic and how you create that look of it just seems so homey and familiar,
Thank you.
Are you going for that? I'm assuming you're going for that.
Well, I think definitely, the equipment that I had available, I think that probably, factored in. It's also a time before cell phones. It's a time before a different storytelling medium. And, probably in the fashion of documentaries that I grew up watching, or, understood to be documentaries. But it is actually a comment that someone else is also, people that saw my exhibit, Bridgewalkers. It's a 3-screen installation, and the center screen is a short documentary called Bridgewalkers about sacred sites in the Bay Area. And the installation counterposes sacred sites in San Francisco, which are erased, and ones in Mexico where there's still sites of transmission of knowledge. And the short documentary deals with the California Indian policy, the genocide that occurred, and some tough subjects. And so some people had mentioned, that they felt like there were these moments where you could just sort of hang with what you're learning, the difficult things you're learning. It's not like they weren't feeling like that pressure coming at them, but they were coming out with a deeper understanding. And so I think that my years working in Mexico, I saw cinema from around the world and worked with Mexican crew. And I think that it informed my storytelling. And I admire people and the way they make stories today, and quick and, short, and I just admire that so much. But I think that is part of my approach, and I'm hoping that, things are getting through in that process.
Yeah, no, it was, I just thought of the word democratic. It just came across as being very democratic. It's just, we get to speak to all these people. I had never heard about the idea of children voting. So there was this idea in the air of, we want everybody involved, to the point that it was a little chaotic,
Yeah.
Everybody to vote. We want everybody to have their say. We want democracy. Heard that a lot in the film. We want democracy. But I think that in fiction filmmaking, there are fewer conversations than in documentary filmmaking. In documentary filmmaking, we have serious conversations about issues such as, who's telling the story, who is on the screen, whose story is being told, and all these questions. And I felt as though, when I watched transitions, I felt as though I was seeing a very, a democratic way of telling somebody else, so, oh, I know one of the things that happens in the film, a couple of times people say to you, what's your name?
Yeah. And the very beginning part, the election part, I was filming in the Centro Histórico, and just filming, and I finish up and I get back home and I start watching the footage, and I realized that I've captured something that many Mexicans that see it couldn't believe that they were witnessing, because it's basically a tactic to disrupt a polling place. Mm-hmm. So you see there's three people that come in together, and they sort of spread out, and one of them starts sort of riling people up, and then someone else starts rallying. And so before you know it, the whole centro is, and the police are coming in. And so a lot of Mexicans said, we've never actually seen that. And I didn't fully understand when I was filming it, but I was turning to capture it. So there were those incredible moments, and then being able to film in the Congress for the inauguration. And, it was an incredible time. I had lived there when Colosio was murdered. He had brought so much hope and the sense of change. And then it was just, cut down. And as someone from the United States, I was learning in the process of those years that I was there, those 7 years. And so I did want to give Mexicans an opportunity to share their voice and their opinions. And at that time, you just didn't see that. You didn't have user-made videos, and you right. Only saw on the news, and it was like, okay, Day of the Dead, drugs, trafficking, violence, immigration. Like those were the 5 ones that we could talk about, in the news. And I wanted to go beyond that. And I guess, it's always been my goal with the filmmaking to be seen as human and valuable. Our opinions are valuable, our perspectives in history.
And it was funny because until you said it earlier, I would never have guessed you came from a news background, because your filmmaking is very far away from the way news looks. And so I could see that could be and another funny thing I just thought about, I mentioned earlier, my client, Thomas Allen Harris, who is African-American, and he went and made a film in Brazil. And so he had a very, little inexpensive camera, and he would be called Gringo. And I thought it was so funny when they would say, and what's your name? Where are you from? And you were like, well, I'm from California. What's your name? Catherine Herrera. Oh, that's a Mexican name.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an interesting thing because I always say, but you are Mexican, right?
Uh-huh.
They knew, and yeah. And we do have one of our family documented from Mexico that we're pretty sure we've found from Mazatlan. So it is my culture as well. And I was there really, as I mentioned, just trying to ground myself and, always being, growing up with the questions like, what are you, what's your background? And, those questions, I think, and in my own family, of having to have an allegiance or choose or side with someone, I think I really just needed to figure out who am I, and going to Mexico was part of it, a very important part. And the Mexican culture is beautiful. The people are so warm and generous, and I still have very good friends that I'm grateful. And my son was born there, and
so yeah, I got stuck on transitions a lot because I was so impressed, as I said, with the aesthetic and how very on-news it was, even though the topic was such a news topic. There's the election and people are voting, and then we get the results and all. It was a very news topic. I don't think they use this phrase in America. We talk in England about hard news. So hard news is, what's on the news. Could be politics or gun violence or actual shootings, the hard news. And then so you took a hard news topic and turned it into this very warm feeling of like a community expressing itself.
Thank you so much. That really means a lot, because everyone shared with me and they wanted to share their experience. Like the one man says, imagine going 40 years without an improvement in our income and our lifestyle. I just think that people don't fully, at that time, didn't have all of those perspectives. So thank you so much. I received that for the people that shared with me in the film, and the many crew. I was fortunate with that film that there was a production company that wanted to support emerging filmmakers. So I was allowed to film at night. And everyone had left.
Yes.
Yeah. And so
gorgeous. Yeah.
And I was able to work in a bay, and I had an editor, and that was how I started, of being able to work with editors. And so, when the technology changed and everyone was like, oh, I shoot, film, edit, and everything, I was like, wow, that's super cool. And I love that. But it's also a beautiful thing if you can afford to work with an editor, because they're so talented and they offer so much.
Absolutely. And I wanted to ask, because I have a very specific question I want to get to, but I want to ask one last question about transitions. So, because I'm always teaching about fundraising. So in that film, how, and, feel free to say as much or as little as you want about what the budget was and, how long it took you to make it, just practical things.
Thank you so much. Well, the production company helped me quite a bit. They also lent me a camera and a camera person to work with me. But it wasn't always possible to have them, so I shot a lot myself. And because I was still working in the legal field, I was able to put money into the film. I wasn't at that point very successful with grants. And so it was kind of a lesson for me to learn that, you move forward any way you can. And I think, I also create artwork, I create installations, and that has always come out of a need. If I couldn't make something with film, I didn't have the money. My motto was, and I think I really picked this up in Mexico, is like, you put your next foot forward. As long as you're working on something creatively, you're moving it forward, you're growing as an artist. And because otherwise I think it can be, discouraging if you don't have equipment, or you don't have the resources, or you don't have a grant. One of my colleagues applied for a grant 10 times.
Yes.
And got it on the 10th time. And, not me. Either I was in financial need, and so when I didn't get it, it was, a big deal to me, or after 2 or 3, I'm like, I'm not a good filmmaker, like I'm not getting these grants, and it was just until the statistics and the information came out where I went, my God, what? Like, this was lightning in a bottle to be able to get a grant, and I wasn't the only one. And I think this openness that is happening now is really healthy in that way, because I did internalize it. I did think, and especially with the pressure of my family of like, okay, you gave up the law and now what? Like, look at you now, hey, you're a bum, that's kind of like, and it's feeling that pressure. And I so badly wanted to have, like, oh, I got a grant, and I got some good news yesterday about something, and my father's no longer here, but I just said, oh, I wish you were, I wish you could see this, now. And
so can you tell us a little bit about now? And one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, because I've never had anybody on to ask about this, but you're currently in a residency, and so now, what is your life as a filmmaker life, but like between, how you're not a bum.
Yes,
So,
I really appreciate all these. Have you guys heard about the imposter syndrome, and
yes.
how many artists have that? Just learning that I wasn't alone in that, has really opened things up for me, and I hope it will for other filmmakers. So yeah, it took a while to get around that.
So tell us about the residency that you're participating in now. And I mean, just even talk about it, like,
Sure.
we've never heard about
Sure.
we don't know what a residency is, right?
Sure. Well, I was involved in a project. I was invited to document the Montalvo Arts Center in Los Gatos had brought together the Bandaloop Vertical Dance Group. I don't know if you've ever seen them, but they're an amazing dance troupe that go up into the trees or on buildings, and they have, harnesses and everything, and they dance and they film it, and it's amazing. And so with the Confederation of Ohlone Peoples, they were collaborating on creating a special performance. And so I was invited to film that project, and then invited to do some editing at the back end of it. And so that's kind of how the residency idea came up. And so a residency is an opportunity to take some time apart from your daily life and everything you're doing, and focus on a project. In some cases, you have housing, and often there's meals provided so that you can just focus on the work. And so my collaboration with the Montalvo has been sort of ongoing. And when this fellowship came up, it shifted our schedule a bit. So I think we will continue and maybe have an additional amount next year as well. So it is my first one that I'm working with the Montalvo on, and I mentioned that to them, like, what do I do, and what are the, how does this work? And so I'm very grateful.
So when you're in a residency, you're staying at a certain place. How long usually are the Montalvo residencies?
They can be anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So staying at a place, you're not at home, your food is provided, so you can purely focus on your work.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And then usually with a residency, is there a, let's call it deliverables, or is it more, I know what project I'm working on it? Does a residency expect you to have something at the end, or are they just happy that you had the time to work on the project and move it forward?
Well, it's, I think, variable. I don't think often you are required to finish something, or, but because we have continued to work over this time, they actually asked me to visualize and create an art installation, and a virtual reality, to start exploring about that possibility. So I think they would like that to continue, and I've done more research. So we may actually have something that we end up with at the end, either editing more of the project that we started with, or exploring this new avenue.
But yes, residencies usually are not saying by the time you finish, we want you to have this. It's just supposed to be a time for there are residencies in all different art forms, but it's a time for an artist to just have the experience of being able to focus on only on their work and not have to think about all the other things.
Yeah, and that's kind of how we decided to shift a little bit the residency, because the fellowship, the onboarding of the fellowship has taken a little bit more time than we expected, and there's some training. So it wasn't necessarily going to be a period of time where I could just focus, and so we said, you know what, let's shift this a little bit and take some more time, probably in 2024, and that works well for this project.
So when they are providing training for you, is that training that's to further your career, or is it about a specific project? How does that work?
Yeah, and this is the 18th Street Art Center Creative Core Fellowship that I just received last month. And this is an opportunity to film for my documentary, my current one, Martin's Beach, and to explore, excuse me, how to expand the impact of that film through an art installation.
Can you tell us a little bit about Martin's Beach, and then I'll open it up to
Sure.
questions.
Sure. Yeah, going back to the photos and the archive of my family, I have photos of Martin's Beach and my family there going back to the 1930s, and the coast, Santa Cruz and Carmel. And so Martin's Beach is a picturesque cove and beach that's about 45 minutes south of San Francisco, about 10 minutes south of Half Moon Bay. And I've been going there as long as I remember. My grandparents took us there, and it wasn't just during the summer, it was year round. This is the same that happened for my dad, for my grandfather, for my cousins. Everybody's grandfathers took them there. And my grandfather also fished, so he did the old A-frame fishing style, and they would bring the fish home and share it with all their neighbors, barbecue, and everybody came over. They knew when they had gone fishing, as my grandma tells it in an interview I did with her. So I was in the process of taking my son, who was 10 years old, to Martin's Beach, and we arrived and the gate was closed. And strangely enough, at that very moment, my father called me, and he told me that my half-brother was in the hospital and deathly ill. And when he learned that I was at Martin's Beach, I explained that, that there's a gate and I can't go down. And he said, no, you're going to have to go down and pray for your half-brother. So I walked as far as I could and did so. And I'm happy to report that my half-brother is a very healthy man. And I think, that collision of events really impacted me, that I wasn't able to get to this place of importance. And my grandfather may not have been able to share with me all the history of our ancestors, but what he did instill in me and share with me was the land and the coast.
Mm.
And so to be cut off from that felt, well, it sparked a lot of feelings. And I had to kind of work through those before I could really take this project on. And even still, sometimes it's still hard. So Martin's Beach was closed down by the new owner. And so there's a large property. This used to be an old ranch in the Mexican period of time, in the Spanish period of time. And it was purchased by one family, which they held for about 80 years. And so that's where you have the continuity. Like my brother, he would show up at the gate and say, "Oh, I'm Larry Herrera's grandson. Oh, come on in," and so having that broken for my son was very discouraging. And talking to my grandma, she just basically said, you're going to have to fight to make sure that's reopened. But she said, don't be angry, because people don't like anger.
Mm. Those are probably very wise words. So I have a couple of questions so the owner of the property shut down the public access to the beach, because you can't buy a beach, can you?
No, you can't. This is kind of a unique property because very early on, people from San Francisco, friends of the owners, would come down, and they started setting up these fishing shacks. So the property itself has about 30 houses on it, in addition to the owner's piece of land. And those are grandfathered in. So he came and he said, "You know what? I don't want to operate this road anymore. So we're closing it down." And the community got up in arms, the surfing community, the fisherman community, and all the families in the Bay Area that were like mine, that had gone there for significant events and milestones. And, just that process of going all the time there and learning it and learning what happens. And so that began quite a legal battle. And
I just want to check and see if anybody has a question, because I have another question. But if anybody has a question, please raise your.
And I'm sorry, I haven't been able to look at the chat.
Don't look at the chat. We don't look at the chat in this group. But
Matt O'Brien knows exactly who it is. Vinod Kosala.
Yeah, if anyone wants to raise their physical hand or their digital hand. So another question I have, when I looked at the work sample you have on this film, I just wanted to ask this. So is there something about this particular beach that was somehow more open? I know I've moved back to Miami, and there's a beach here, Virginia Beach, which was a beach that African Americans were, allowed to attend, whereas they were not allowed to attend. Was there something about that with this particular beach? I wasn't sure if that was part of the story.
It is definitely part of the story. As the unfolding of the archive, we're also going through history. And, a lot of our ancestors did not share their Native heritage, California Native heritage, because that's what you did to survive. Recently, I was with some community members, and one of them got up and they said, when you're told as a kid that you could be killed if you share this information, you don't share that information. And so, you have experiences even with relatives that are Ohlone saying, I'm Mexican. And you have to understand that from that perspective. And they're so I think this spot always had significance. And I think a lot of the community is connected to it for that reason. But some people have said that it also resembles Europe, some European beaches. And so it also brought like Portuguese communities, other people who saw in that place their home.
Yeah, we have people who come to this who are definitely from all other places other than California. I think that there's something that just needs to be explained, which is that California, unlike many other states in the US, wiped out. Is that the right word? Really, the genocide of the Native American people was pretty complete.
Yes.
Is that a right way of saying it? And
yes.
so I didn't know that till I lived in California. I didn't realize that there was a somewhat different relationship with Native Americans. When COVID hit, I left California and I went to Montana, and the Native American presence there is just everywhere. But in California, I remember there was, I used to go to on Thanksgiving on Alcatraz, and people came from all over to that. And then I do remember finding, I can't remember where it was, but a historic site. It's quite small, might be the size of this apartment, but it was quite small. But and I remember thinking, that's the first time I've seen anything. The first time that I've seen any remains of a Native American village, I think it was, and I can't for the life of me remember where it was, but it was, it's quite, however bad the genocide was in the rest of the US, in California, there's something different.
Well, I sadly don't think it was that different, but here it was the missions. And, depending on how close a tribe was to these new settlements, for example, the Ohlone were right here in the Bay Area, but our Pomo cousins who are further up north, they have 100-year difference in contact.
Right.
So that's an additional 100 years or 50 years or however it is of cultural preservation. And, the situation with the Ohlone, of course, this is one of the most expensive real estate in the country, maybe the world, I don't know, but I would like to say that one of our elders, Anne Marie Sayers, of the Mamutsin Ohlone, fought to get back her land allotment, and she has made that a space for ceremony and for diplomatic meetings and for the community at large in the Bay Area. Karina Gould is another activist on the sacred site issue, as well as a tribal leader of the Lushan Ohlone. And they have, through a land trust, just yesterday received another donation of land. And there are growing collaborations. The Amam Mutsun, not far from Martins Beach, are doing a coastal stewardship program that they've been involved in for 10 or 12 years. And that's bringing back the knowledge of coastal stewardship and management of the land before the Ohlone were removed. And today, many Ohlone are unable to live in the area because of the expense.
Right.
So when you think about the 12 to 15,000 years of documented presence, if not longer, you're talking about thousands of generations living in one spot and gaining that knowledge, that scientific understanding that is being used now to confront climate change. And I think for me, that was one of the important aspects of this story. Vinod Khosla, as explained to me, has never been to Martins Beach.
Who hasn't been to Martins Beach?
The owner, Vinod.
Oh, yeah. I remember that part of the story. It is, it's
And I think, just contrasting his connection and mine, it's what led me to think, I want to go and speak to community members about this coastal stewardship and sort of look at those two. Are we experiencing this coastal climate change because we're disconnected from the land? We don't have that knowledge of the land, and so we don't have that. We're not seeing every year the changes in the land. Obviously, many people are, and
I'll be going to Trinidad in a few days for my father's funeral, and
so sorry.
Every year that I go, I see the impact of climate change. He has a farm in the south, right on the ocean, and so I've been saying for several years, that especially people in an island culture, and then now I'm in Miami Beach. We're over time, but we're just talking. But in Miami Beach, the sidewalk has been raised 1, 2, 3 feet. So when you now in Miami Beach, when you leave a store, you walk up to the sidewalk. And so, but Miami Beach is a very, very wealthy community in comparison to some. But anyway, I don't know. I mean, certainly in Trinidad can't afford to build up its land 2 or 3 feet, So I feel as though for somebody who is of my age to have seen, I first went to Trinidad when I was about 15, but to be able to witness the impact of climate change, that clearly has not happened before in people's lifetimes.
Absolutely. I have been used to a certain weather my whole life. The patterns, what's coming, what to expect. And to see and feel that in your body, it's changing. I know the winds are stronger. I know, and then my research has taken me into, looking at how the ocean was formed and the incredible importance of the currents. The way that humans came to exist was through, these resources that grew out of the ocean, the billions of years it took to get this perfect climate that we've been living in. And then to look and see in 50 years, 50 years, this is solvable. This is reversible. Mother Earth works with us. So, what can I do as a filmmaker to engage people in this way when they've heard it all? We just heard this week that the ocean temperatures are so much stronger. So, I appreciate your story about Trinidad, because as I've started talking to people around the world, as I workshop this in the Sundance Collab, I am speaking to people from all over the world that have the same issue, are facing the same challenge with public access. And, in California, we are very fortunate that public access is part of our Constitution. And then we have coming up the 50th anniversary of the Coastal Act, which I hope these projects will be a part of, and sort of educating this great, the way that we've set up the model, and then what could be done better. And I think that's introducing and collaborating more with Native communities with that traditional knowledge. Because as one of my elders recently said, we all walk under the same sun, Native, non-Native, and we're going to have to figure this out together.
But the Native tradition has a very different approach to the relationship with the earth than the Western tradition. I have another client, to add to your list of stories. I have another client who's making a documentary about the Chesapeake Bay. And I didn't know. See, I love film. Working with filmmakers, I get to learn all the time. So apparently the Chesapeake Bay is the largest estuary in the world, other than another one. And so, for thousands of years, Native Americans were fishing in a certain way. And I couldn't tell you now what the way is, but he tells me, and I'm like, oh, what is that? And there was always this sustainability. But then once Europeans came in and overfished and have destroyed the diversity, now climate change has destroyed the diversity. The famous Chesapeake Bay blue crab has been pretty much, is being eliminated for the blue catfish, which is an invasive species. I don't think it's going to be able to be stopped. But so it's like there was this whole approach from indigenous peoples everywhere in the world. There was this whole approach that had a sustainability mindset that was replaced with a, conquer Mother Nature mindset that we have not yet decided to let go of. That's how it seems to me.
Yeah, and I think
in America, we have not decided to let go of that.
And I think, the research on my mom's side, what I've started to go all the way back, to the time when in Europe people did understand nature, healing properties and the cycle of the sun and the moon. And then comes a very horrific time where anyone who follows that path is eliminated.
Executed, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And originally they would, I'm sorry, but, they would burn men and women. They would call them witches and burn men and women and have the community stand around. And eventually they said, wow, everybody's getting so angry, we'll stop burning the men.
Oh.
And I think that this points to a very important path that was taken. One, to separate men and women in that way. And number two, to really instill, think about it, thousands of years of that practice of instilling fear in anyone that would follow the path of nature.
Right, the path of wholeness and healing.
And, as one of my, Chairman Val Lopez said recently, it's not just the people who were conquered that need to heal. It's also the people that conquer because they were conquered first. No one ever thinks of that. And without that reflection, how do we get past these fears in the DNA that make us watch and examine and see in front of our very eyes the atmosphere changing to one that would not sustain life? There has to be some deep-seated reason for that, because it doesn't make logical sense. So I think, film allows us to explore these very interesting concepts and hopefully impact for the better.
One thing that helps my heart is that the American Republican Party is the only ruling party in the world that believes that there's no such thing as climate change. So we're not the same as other places. Everybody else is working together to try to combat climate change. It's just in this country, we think that there's some argument about it. That doesn't exist elsewhere. But I love the idea that we could look to Native American communities and traditions and that whole way of looking at the world as a way to heal our entire planet. Indigenous, I guess, because it's everywhere in the world, that way of looking at things, which thought of sustainability as being fundamental and in practice, not just in theory, but in practice, that's a very positive idea. And in America, we just need to get past this particular moment of hatred and anger and grievance that says we've got to pretend that our violent history didn't happen. But that's where we're at right now. But I think it's going to be over soon. I think it's going to be over soon. And
Yeah.
that we can all get on board with moving forward in a much more positive way. Everybody.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, being asleep doesn't help anybody. White, black, brown, and purple, it just doesn't help. And we have so many amazing people that are here on this land, and they come with good intentions and they have good objectives. And I just think it will be nice to see them raised up and working for the positive rather than what we see now can be very discouraging.
Yes.
So I do feel like these stories of collaboration between Native communities and local communities, governments, is a very positive, because that's where we come from. We believe in caring for each other, our responsibility. And I was raised also with that sense of responsibility. So you feel it, everyone feels it, and it's exciting to think that, wow, because when you think about when we put our mind to something as a world, hey, I think we could, do quite a bit. During the pandemic, you saw all the animals coming out, right?
Yeah. Well, usually we only go over because people are asking questions, but now Jeff's going to ask a question.
Thank you.
Jeff, please ask a question. But I've just so enjoyed talking to you, Catherine. Jeff, please ask a question.
Hi, Jeff.
You're muted. You're muted. Yeah, there you go. Now you're unmuted.
Oh, did I ask a question?
Oh, you raised your hand, so we thought you had a question.
Oh, okay.
You were just
I do have a question. I want to know how do I get grants for my film? I mean,
Jeff, that's the best question.
huh?
Joanne's probably more experienced with that than me. But one thing I will say is I have learned now that every grant application is an opportunity to work on your story.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And where would I go to get a grant?
Well, I think what I've found is being part of different filmmaker groups. I'm not sure where you're located.
I'm in Ohio.
In Ohio? Okay.
Columbus,
Ohio.
Columbus, Ohio.
Columbus.
Okay.
Yeah, Columbus, Ohio.
Do you know where Pinhook is?
Oh, I never heard of it.
No? Okay. Yeah, I would recommend if you have established film organizations, community film organizations, I would start to plug into those and get their newsletters. The International Documentary Association, if you join, you'll get their newsletters, and they're always offering opportunities. I found Sundance Collab to be an amazing community. They offer workshops on how to apply for grants. You hear from grant tours, you start getting an understanding.
Okay.
And I wish you the best, and don't give up.
Yeah, I had this screenplay I wrote back in 2005, and I've been trying to get people to produce it, like movie companies and all these people, but they just turned me away.
Well, that's common, it's not easy, this business. But have you heard of Clubhouse?
No, I haven't.
Check that out. Clubhouse is more of an audio program or app. And there are some amazing professionals in the entertainment industry and the entertainment law industry that have rooms, and you go in there and you can learn so much. And I think when you do, you'll see that you're not alone. There are like script reading groups. But yeah, I would just put yourself in touch as much as possible with other filmmakers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thanks for the answer.
everything I do, Jeff, is about helping filmmakers learn how to raise money. And so I am on Clubhouse every Tuesday at noon Eastern. I do this interview every other week. I teach classes. I'm always teaching, and it's all about raising money. And once a filmmaker says about 2 sentences, I know exactly where you're at in the process and why you're stuck. So keep coming to my events, and let's get you unstuck.
Well, the thing about it, I wasn't out to be a filmmaker. It's just that I worked in this area, this prison I worked in. And I was thinking about helping the ladies. It was a female prison. I was thinking about helping the women when they get out of prison to send them to school.
Thank you, Jeff. Lovely to meet you. I'm going to call it quits. Catherine, this has just been an absolute pleasure.
Thank
so
you.
Great to meet you. We have to keep in touch. And I look forward to, I just signed up for your newsletter, so I look forward to getting all your updates and hearing about everything.
Thank you so much. And I know someone asked where you could see Martin's Beach. It's still in production, so not quite yet. But you can sign up at catherineherrera.com. Sign up for the newsletter, and I'll keep you updated on how the process is going. Thank you.
Definitely, definitely.
Thank you.
So great to meet you. Enjoy your residency. Thank you for taking
Thank
time
you.
out and talk to us.
Thank you
Instead
so
of
much.
filmmaking.
Wonderful to spend it. It went by very quickly, Joanna. You're so good at this, Joanne, and thank you for inviting me. And thank you to everybody that came today. And I'm just wishing you the very best on your journey, and just keep moving the foot forward. Just take another step.
So true, so true. Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.